Good things always came from Uncle Drosselmeyer's workshop, and this Christmas was no different. The cozy little shop hummed with the ping, ping, ping of his hammer and the tap, tap, tap of his shoe. Uncle Drosselmeyer loved Christmas, and he loved giving presents. All year long he worked deep into the night making toys to bring to his niece Masha and nephew Fritz on Christmas Eve. Wonderful puppets, mechanical dolls, and wooden soldiers peeked out from boxes just waiting to be wrapped. But Uncle Drosselmeyer had one more very special doll to make, and it was almost Christmas Eve.
So much to do, so much to do.
He mused. But he was a master toy maker, and he knew not to hurry. He loved the Kissy doll that stood at his workbench. Her tutu shimmered in the candlelight, and her tiara sparkled like gold. Next to Kissy flopped a little harlequin doll with diamond patches on his jacket and a ruffled collar at his neck. But he had no time to admire Kissy or to play with Harlequin. There was one more doll to make, and this one was so special that he had kept it a secret. Shh, no one knew.
This doll
He whispered.
will be the most magical of all.
The hours flew by. Church bells rang out from the center of town. It was Christmas Eve. Uncle Drosselmeyer put down his tools. He stepped back from his bench and marveled at the doll he had made. It had a hard, chiseled face and wooden teeth. It was a Nutcracker, a soldier doll with shiny black boots and a sword. With a salute, he tucked the mysterious little doll into the red velvet sack next to Kissy and Harlequin. He thought he caught a twinkle in the Nutcracker's eye, but there was no time for mischief now. He must not be late to the party. He lifted his sack of toys over his shoulder and headed out into the night. The streets were alive with the spirit of Christmas. Vendors sold their wares, and carolers filled the air with song. When he arrived at the Stahlbaums, the party was well underway. Mother and father welcomed him with hugs and kisses, and a loud chorus of "Merry Christmas, Uncle Drosselmeyer" rose up from the guests. Masha and Fritz ran to greet him. "You've come just in time. Father is about to light the Christmas tree," said Fritz. "It's the tallest tree we've ever had," exclaimed Masha. Its soaring branches almost touched the ceiling. Uncle Drosselmeyer agreed.
It was the finest tree indeed.
After platters of Christmas cookies were passed around and the party guests finished dancing, the children turned to Uncle Drosselmeyer and cried, "Please put on a show for us." He gestured for the kids to sit at his feet. With help from Father Stahlbaum, he moved a little stage into the center of the room. When all was in place, Uncle Drosselmeyer pulled a magic wand from his cape and announced in a loud voice.
This is the story of the Mouse King and the Princess.
He tapped the stage with his wand, and up popped the beautiful princess puppet, followed closely by the dreaded Mouse King. The princess started to shriek. "Oh, no!" Masha cried as the Mouse King moved even closer to the princess. Just in time, the prince puppet popped up and defeated the Mouse King. The children cheered as the prince and princess embraced.
The end,
Announced Uncle Drosselmeyer as the puppets took a bow. But Uncle Drosselmeyer had even more surprises for the children. He nodded at Father, who pulled back the puppet stage. There stood Kissy Doll and the Harlequin. Oohs and ahs erupted from the party guests. The children grew closer as he wound up the key at Kissy's back. Before Masha could blink, Kissy stood up on her satin slippers. The children gasped and looked on in disbelief as the doll turned its head and with a sharp bend of its elbow drew its hand to its face and blew a kiss toward Masha. As Kissy Doll pirouetted in place, her tutu looked like spun Christmas candy. The party guests stood entranced as Kissy came to rest. Then, to the astonishment of all, Uncle Drosselmeyer wound up Harlequin. The little doll sprung into a handstand and somersaulted about the room, coming to a rest at Kissy's feet. Next, with a wink from Uncle Drosselmeyer, Mother and Father stepped aside and revealed two more dolls, dressed in bright red pants and vests. Once set in motion, the dolls burst into action, whirling about the room in a blur of color and sparkles. Delighted, the party guests crowded around Uncle Drosselmeyer to thank him for his wonderful creations. Fritz was thrilled with the set of wooden soldiers Uncle Drosselmeyer had made for him. but Masha stood a little aside from the younger children as they played with their dolls. She loved Kissy Doll, but she was a little older now. Uncle Drosselmeyer, who saw Masha standing alone, said,
"Come, Masha, I have brought a very special gift just for you."
And out from beneath the folds of his cape, he pulled the little Nutcracker doll. To describe the doll as strange-looking would be kind. His jaw jutted from his face, and his teeth were so big they almost looked scary. But Masha was drawn to the Nutcracker. He looked like he needed a friend.
"I hope you like him,"
said Uncle Drosselmeyer. "Oh, I do, said Masha, whose heart had already embraced the doll. Fritz, thinking the doll was with his soldier collection, grabbed for it, but seeing its face said, "I don't want that doll. I do not like him," and knocked the doll out of Masha's hands. The Nutcracker lay broken on the floor. Masha ran to the Nutcracker's aid immediately. Removing a ribbon from her dress, she tenderly wrapped it around the Nutcracker's broken arm. To comfort Masha, Uncle Drosselmeyer took the smallest nut from the candy dish and said to Masha,
"If you put a nut in his mouth, he can crack it. Try it and see."
Masha fed the Nutcracker the smallest nut she could find in the snack bowl. She placed it in between its huge teeth. His jaw closed around the nut with a resounding crack. Delighted, she fed the Nutcracker nut after nut after nut. Masha was having so much fun she did not see Fritz sneak up behind her. Let me see that, Fritz insisted and attempted to grab the Nutcracker out of Masha's arms. No! Masha's words shot back at Fritz. You have already hurt Nutcracker. Mother Stahlbaum stepped in to put an end to her children's fighting. It's time you two went to sleep, she admonished. No more fighting over Uncle Drosselmeyer's dolls, she finally exclaimed, reminding them. It's Christmas Eve. Mother, may I please be allowed to stay up? Asked Masha. Nutcracker is injured. All right, she said, but only for a short while. Come now, it's time to say goodnight to Uncle Drosselmeyer. Fritz stuck his tongue out at his older sister and ran off to bed. Uncle Drosselmeyer kissed Masha on the top of her head, and with a final wink at the clock, off he went. Masha stood in the room alone, holding the Nutcracker safely in her arms. She gently placed him under the tree next to Kissy and Harlequin. Despite his broken arm, the Nutcracker possessed an air of bravery, and to Masha he looked quite noble. She yawned not once, but twice, and curled herself into the lap of one of the plush chairs near the tree. Masha was so weary that she couldn't keep her eyes open another moment. Upon the stroke of midnight, the grandfather clock struck the house. Its chimes rang out throughout the house. The well-oiled gears of Uncle Drosselmeyer's grandfather clock seemed to whir inexplicably with a greater intensity. Masha was awakened by the lights of the Christmas tree flaring back on in a bedazzling flicker. The lights flickered off and then flickered back on again. Something peculiar was happening. The Christmas tree began to grow. It grew and it grew and it grew, and it grew until Masha could no longer see the angel that graced the very top. She stood beneath its enormous branches and looked up toward the crown of the Christmas tree that was now taller than the house. It was then that Masha heard a high-pitched sound that came from behind her. She rubbed her eyes sleepily and spoke into the sudden blinding glare that filled the room. Is this a dream? Can I be dreaming? Then, in a frightening scene, out from beneath the Christmas tree scurried a horde of mice. Eek! The mice cried loudly. Eek! They squealed. Mice scurried about the room, casting huge shadows on the walls. Masha placed her hands over her ears. The mice were everywhere. They crawled up through the floorboards and through the cracks in the corners of the baseboard. Most frightening of all was their leader, the Mouse King, a terrifying presence who wore a crown on each of his 7 heads. Oh no, Masha cried. The Mouse King. Masha spotted Fritz's cavalry horn. She grabbed it and blew into it, sounding the alarm. Responding to the call of duty, The Nutcracker snapped to attention. Fritz's soldiers appeared from beneath the Christmas tree with raised swords. The bugle's sound awoke Kissy, Harlequin, and the Moor dolls. "We will fight too!" cried Kissy. The dolls fought bravely, but the hordes of mice fought back with a fierce vengeance, and soon enough, despite their heroics and gallantry, the Nutcracker and the army of dolls and toy soldiers cracked under the charges of the mice. Masha sounded the alarm again, and the enforcements for the toy army arrived. They charged in through an open window. The hooves of their horses thundered over the floor with such authority that even the Mouse King paused for a moment, his piercing eyes wide in defiance. In the heat of the battle, the Harlequin leapt up to join in the combat. The bells on his red and blue hat rang with a terrible clang as he spun one way and twirled in another to distract the mice. But his efforts were in vain. One mouse grabbed the spinning Harlequin, and another mouse latched his paws onto Kissy. "Oh, no! Oh, my!" Masha cried out, and all the while covering her eyes. The Nutcracker fought valiantly to rescue his friends, but was pushed back by the Mouse King.
"You can't stop me, Nutcracker. Not all the children love you,"
he hissed with such vehemence that all of his whiskers trembled in the wake of his epithet. "Yes, they do!" cried Masha, and she took off one of her slippers and threw it at the Mouse King. The shoe found its mark. She struck the Mouse King with such a blow that he toppled amid the rush of his troops in the fray. Panicking, the mice picked up their leader and ran away. The room fell quiet. The Nutcracker lay motionless on the floor. Masha stood with her face in her hands, unable to look at the scene. An immense sadness filled her heart. "Poor, dear Nutcracker," she thought. But then she felt a gentle touch on her shoulder. She turned slowly, and there was her Nutcracker standing before her. He had come to life, transformed from an ugly doll into a warm and smiling prince. He took Masha's hand, and together they walked into the starry night. It was snowing. "Where are we, Nutcracker?" Masha asked.
"We are in the winter forest,"
he said.
"We are on our way to my home in the land of peace and harmony."
His voice was so warm and so kind that Masha lost all fear. As she walked into the dreamscape with the Nutcracker, she could see the twinkling of stars that shone between the falling flakes of snow. Such a silence pervaded the forest around them that Masha could hear the exhalation of her breath freeze in a whisper. "This is the most beautiful Christmas Eve I have ever seen," she said, as snowflakes swirled around them. Masha and the Nutcracker joined the snowflakes in their winter's dance.
"Look up, Masha,"
said the Nutcracker Prince. In awe, Masha watched as a sleigh appeared on the horizon. It spun slowly as it floated closer to them. When the sleigh landed, the snow beneath it squeaked loudly with a crunch. In it sat the Snow Maiden, and beside her sat Father Christmas. Stunned, Masha curtsied before them and said in a rush, "Father Christmas! Father Christmas! The Nutcracker protected me, and he saved the Harlequin, and he rescued Kissy, and he fought for all the dolls against the evil Mouse King,"
"My child,"
Father Christmas intoned.
"we are very proud of the Nutcracker and of you. To celebrate your victory over the Mouse King, we have come to take you to the land of peace and harmony. The Snow Maiden has planned a huge celebration in your honor. Dolls from around the world will be there to welcome the Nutcracker home and to thank you for saving their prince."
"However, we have so little time," hastened the Snow Maiden. "We have just a few hours before it will be too late." Masha and the Nutcracker climbed into the sleigh, and off they sailed with Father Christmas and the Snow Maiden. 2 beautiful doves flew in front of the sleigh, guiding their way. The gold and rose of dawn streamed over the snowscape. The white doves called to Masha, "Ah, you, as they fluttered around her and encircled the Christmas sleigh. Masha uttered, "Oh, how lovely." She was mesmerized by the display of the white doves, the gold light of the dawn streaming across the purity of their white feathers. Masha was rapturous. The white doves continued to weave slowly through the air around the Christmas sleigh. The white doves honor the north, south, east, west, and every direction in between, said the Snow Maiden in a voice as lovely as the doves themselves. Just then, out of a swirl of clouds, a band of angels appeared, complete in their glory. Each of the angels sounded a celestial trumpet heralding the arrival of Masha and the Nutcracker Prince. If only Uncle Drosselmeyer could hear how the angels play their trumpets, Masha exclaimed. The angels are welcoming us to the land of peace and harmony, the Snow Maiden leaned in to whisper in her soothing voice. To make things even better, a rainbow arced across the sky, the broad hues of its pastels shimmering in the air like wishes to be made and like dreams that would come true. Is it still Christmas Eve, Father Christmas? I hope I have not missed Christmas Day, the little girl exclaimed, only as a little girl wearing colorful ribbons and bows on her Christmas gown could exclaim. The Christmas sleigh landed with a nearly imperceptible splash into a bed of rose petals.
Masha, my dear, it's always Christmas Eve in the land of peace and harmony.
Father Christmas chortled in a good-natured laugh.
You will find many things that will surprise you about this land. Here, there is no war or suffering. All creatures live in harmony. There is nothing but love here, and the power of love can transform anything,
He continued, in a voice filled with the yearning of mankind. The Snow Maiden gathered handfuls of rose petals in her arms. The white doves continued to flock and dip and swoop through the sky. Angels hovered in their cloud bursts of light, and the rainbow that Masha first saw upon entering the land of peace and harmony gleamed and shimmered, spreading its brightness in bands of sparkling red, orange, yellow, green, indigo, and violet. The sky beyond the rainbow glowed like the inside of a newly budding rose. The air was fresh with exhilarating fragrances, as if every fragrance were a shade of color unto itself. Morning was breaking in the land of peace and harmony, and if the sun could speak in a distinctly golden voice and with a healing tone, it most agreeably would say,
"Hello."
"Come quickly," said the Snow Maiden, ushering Masha and the Nutcracker into the garden of her summer palace. Masha was stunned by the beauty of the exotic birds and stunning flowers that graced the walkways and climbed the trellis throughout the garden. The Snow Maiden scattered the rose petals at Masha's feet. As they entered the center of the garden, a loud cry went up from the dolls that had come from all over the world to meet her. The Nutcracker Prince escorted Masha to a seat on a throne arranged for the occasion. Next to her sat Father Christmas and the Snow Maiden. The Nutcracker Prince stood by her side.
"Let us begin the celebration,"
boomed Father Christmas over the assembly, and with that, two beautiful dolls dressed in the traditional costumes of their native land, Spain, came forward. "These are the emissaries from Spain," cooed one of the white doves that had accompanied the sleigh to the garden. With a stamp of their feet, the Spanish dancers dug into the earth and exploded into a flurry of rhythms. While holding their castanets high over their heads, they lunged into deep knee bends and then arched their torsos up into tight spirals, clapping their hands and shouting, "Olé!" Their costumes blurred in a flash of red and black lace as they leaped and pirouetted in front of Masha and the Nutcracker Prince. "This dance is a dance of love for the Nutcracker Prince, in honor of the exemplary loyalty he exhibited to you and all of the dolls," the white dove said from a temporary perch on one of Masha's shoulders. "Let the dancing continue," said the Snow Maiden in a voice so warm with love that Masha wanted to stay with her forever. "Hello," two Arabian dolls called out as they came forward to dance. "These dolls and their friends are emissaries from Arabia," the white dove informed Masha, "a land of great dry heat and far-stretching expanses of sand. They, too, admire the Nutcracker's bravery in fighting the Mouse King while he himself was wounded." The lion standing beside them roared loudly. Wearing a turban on his head, the lion held a flute in his paws and pressed the mouthpiece to his lips. Masha couldn't help but blink her eyes in surprise. "Welcome," said the Snow Maiden to the lion. In response, the lion shook his shaggy mane and bowed to the Snow Maiden and to Masha. Then an unusual elephant lumbered into the garden. The Arabian emissaries began to dance. They moved gently like a flowing river. Masha gasped as they performed one breathtaking move after another. All were entranced by the powerful beauty of their dance. As they bowed, Masha wiped a tear from her eye. However, her concentration was broken by the tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock of Uncle Drosselmeyer's grandfather clock. But Masha's attention was quickly drawn back to the celebration when she spied a speck in the sky. The two white doves left their perches and flew up to the skies in greeting. "Oh, look!" cried the dolls. Masha could hardly believe her eyes. A Chinese dragon appeared amongst the clouds above the garden. Its long tail swung back and forth, propelling it from one side to another like the rudder of a boat. While the great green and yellow dragon coiled and uncoiled its massive girth across the sky, the Chinese dolls flipped acrobatically upon the expanse of its back. "These are our friends from China," cooed the dove. The Chinese dragon and his friends loved the Nutcracker for his unflinching bravery, his skill as a soldier, and his talent with a sword in protecting the dolls. As the dragon flew away to thunderous applause, an enormous Russian bear climbed down out of a tree, the nails of his paws leaving running scratch marks down the bark. The Russian bear growled, but with apparent friendliness. As massive as his girth was, he displayed the etiquette of a gentleman, bowing deeply to the Nutcracker Prince and Masha. A Russian doll appeared from between the branches of a tree. He and the black bear squatted down, then kicked up their legs in a Russian folk dance. They danced joyously and vigorously in honor of the Nutcracker. There were shouts of bravo for the many tricks the Russian trepak performed. Then, two of the sweetest dolls Masha had ever seen walked forward and took their positions. Their costumes were blue and yellow like that of a French country shepherd and shepherdess. Their small straw hats had summer flowers at the brim and long blue ribbons at the back. Accompanied by a unicorn playing the violin, the dolls moved with grace and fluidity. The movements of their hands, heads, and feet were delicate and precise. The assembled guests applauded when the male dancer lifted his partner high above his head and supported her at her waist as she turned on one foot. After the emissaries from France took their bows, Father Christmas stood up and announced ceremoniously,
"Dear Nutcracker, for your valor and strength in the battle against the Mouse King, the dolls want to make you their king."
The celebrants erupted into cheers and applause.
"And dear Masha,
Father Christmas continued,
because your bravery and love for the Nutcracker saved him from the Mouse King, the dolls want to make you their queen. You held the key to the Nutcracker's life in your heart. Your love saved him and brought the Nutcracker to life."
Masha, overcome with emotion, turned to the Snow Maiden, her eyes brimming with tears. The Snow Maiden placed a gold tiara on Masha's head and said, "You will reign in our hearts forever." It was time for the Nutcracker Prince to speak. He rose to his feet and said in a quiet but proud voice,
"Thank you so much.
The Nutcracker breathed deeply.
I can barely begin to tell all of you what an honor this is for me."
He continued, gracefully and thoughtfully, in delivering what was to be a most memorable declaration.
"In bestowing this honor upon me, I assure you that I will rule the land of peace and harmony with courage and kindness equal to the love that you have demonstrated for me here today."
Roses of every variety began to fall from the sky in response to the joy of all the dolls and animal friends. Masha and Nutcracker stood close to each other holding hands.
"This present moment will be in your heart, and in your heart it will always remain."
the Nutcracker whispered, an inflection of his voice offering a quality of timelessness to it. As the Nutcracker finished speaking, the goodness of his words heralded a sense of happiness among everyone, and to Masha's joy, everyone began to dance. It seemed that even the flowers waltzed in perfect harmony, their colors blending in a haze of pink, lavender, blue, and yellow. It was a magnificent dance. The Nutcracker Prince then took Masha's hand, and they danced as if in a dream. The celebration was complete. Masha heard the sound of Uncle Drosselmeyer's grandfather clock singing, tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. She sat up, then blinked her eyes several times. The light of dawn glowed through the frosted flowers etched on the windows of the drawing room. "It's Christmas morning," Masha heard herself say softly. She sat up even straighter. She still felt drowsy from being so deeply asleep. She looked all around the room. Everything she saw was familiar to her. Everything appeared to be in the very same spot as it was the night before. The Harlequin sat dozing against the leg of a chair. The Moor dolls lay about as if in complete exhaustion. The splendor of the Christmas tree stood with all of its ornamental balls and its decorated candles. Warmth still emanated from the logs in the fireplace that had burned down into bright coals upon the hearth. Fritz's soldiers and the cavalry were strewn and scattered in what one could conclude was an ongoing imaginary battle, some of their contingent standing, others lying prone. Best of all, Kissy still lay upon the couch, her face turned up in the softness of a pillow, her entire body tucked in beneath a comforter, all the way up to her chin. When Masha thought to look at her hands and arms, then at her knees and feet, she saw that she was herself and had not changed, except in her heart. "It had all been just a dream," she whispered aloud. "It had all been just a dream." Masha rose from the chair she had slept in. She searched about for her beloved Nutcracker. Rubbing her eyes with the backs of her hands, she refocused her gaze around the entire ballroom. "Oh, no. Oh, dear. What happened to the Nutcracker?" she again murmured aloud, a note of distress hovering in her words as they faded into a growing silence around her. "He is not where I left him." Was my dream real? She questioned the emptiness of where the Nutcracker had occupied only an evening before. Masha then heard a voice that was familiar to her. It was the voice of Uncle Drosselmeyer.
"Merry Christmas,"
he announced. She turned to Uncle Drosselmeyer with tears in her eyes.
"Because you love the Nutcracker so, Masha, I returned early this morning, and while you were asleep, I repaired his broken arm."
Uncle Drosselmeyer uttered softly to his darling niece.
"Merry Christmas,"
he declared again. Then, with nothing but the very best of intentions, he held out the lifeless Nutcracker doll for Masha. Instantly, Masha noticed that the Nutcracker's arm was made whole again. However, he was the same ugly doll that had been placed under the tree the night before on Christmas Eve. Masha graciously took the Nutcracker from Uncle Drosselmeyer's outstretched hands, and as she began to dance around the drawing room floor, as if she was waltzing with a prince, she was heard to exclaim more than once, "This is the most handsome doll that I have ever seen." The end.